Greetings, fellow travelers, explorers, and seekers in this journey called life, and welcome to the Nexus. My name is Robert Bauer, and I will be your host for the next hour. On this NexCast, we will preview the upcoming original content series called Cosmological Constructs of Creation, with my friend and colleague, Cosmological Consultant Jeff Harman, found only here on the Nexus NexCast. This multi-part series will explore the vast depths and wide-ranging data and knowledge sets of ancient observations, analysis, mythos, and insights of astronomy and astrology throughout time and space. We will look for intersections of separate and connected nuggets of knowledge between these ideas and concepts, and how contemporary sciences of physics and metaphysics have intersectionality that can and will change the conventional paradigms of thought and reality. To get the most of this NexCast, please visit our YouTube channel, the Nexus NexCast, to see the visuals, graphs, and charts, and how these seemingly disconnected areas of knowledge are actually connected in profound and mysterious ways. For more information, please see the links in the description below. Enjoy the journey. It's only just begun. Sometimes when, in fact, most times, especially when it's the first time you're hearing about this, and this delineation of this energetic expression within this cosmological construct of creation,
it's incomprehensible how vast this is. When you are talking about spectral frequencies of sound, light, physical vibration, I mean, that is so narrow and so limiting compared to thought. I mean, even quantum physicists will tell you that thought seems to exceed the speed of light. I mean, let's take light.
Well, quantum, the whole entanglement model in quantum mechanics is evidence for that, right?
That's exactly right. But yeah, see, again, this is a framework at least to have a discussion like this. And when you start getting up into these worlds, I mean, again, you're hundreds of dimensions above the physical universe as we might know it.
Right.
And I would even say there's so many ways you could look at this diagram. As you go up the scale, there's higher vibrations up here. I mean, we don't know. I mean, we see what we see with these telescopes, like you were mentioning the other day, this cosmic wave hit the Earth. I really think physically I've felt that the last couple of days. I've been really wiped out. I mean, extremely tired. I can really feel it. But in any event, when you start getting up into these dimensions, and this is really interesting stuff because the biblical story of the fall of Adam and Eve and all this stuff. And we have the same story in the Bhagavad Gita. It talks about, the great war when Lord Shiva, caused the universe to change. And now we have this great war between good and evil. It's the same story we see in the Western Judeo-Christian religions where there's good and evil, the fallen spirits. And of course, we see that here. It talks about the fourth hierarchy. So this diagram is looking at things from many different perspectives because you can talk about it in many different ways. The seraphims, the cherubims, and the thrones are exceedingly high angels. In fact, the seraphims, there's debate. Some people say the cherubims surround the throne of God, or the seraphims do. Well, I think they both do. And the thrones appear to be some very high angels, and they appear to guide the souls into creation. So this is not an absolute diagram. It's just a mere guideline and does nothing to, I think, show how divine and how complex it is. And they say God actually divided the light so that creation could happen. And that was and again, the tree of life and the what we call Sephirotic Kabbalah really works kind of nice to show this, even though you could show creation in other ways, kind of like the Vedantic stuff does, but where they do it through deities. But we're doing the same thing here. This is more Western angelic models. And then, of course, you start refining the light gets more and more condensed as it goes down into these, again, hundreds of dimensions here, and then, or at least the better part of 100 dimension. And then when you start getting down into here into the universes, so the zodiacs that we use in astrology, they're way the heck down here. I mean, even the central sun, which is myopic compared to the Milky Way. I mean, if you jump back and you start looking at the cosmos, I mean, all these billions upon billions upon billions of stars, our Milky Way is way the heck, down in the, or I should say our solar system and our central sun. When we start getting into this model where we talk about, again, the tropical sidereal zodiac, our central sun is way back, or I should say, it would be, all of that would be infinitesimal here compared to the universe. And God literally only knows. Science doesn't know. No one knows. I mean, these are mysteries. You get into black holes and portals and time dimensional portals. There's so many things, wormholes, all these things that we all have heard about forever. These are mysteries that are all lying in this whole Yetziratic dimension. And then there's multiple dimensions. Again, there may be 49 and 49 subdimensions. So this gives you an idea just what we're dealing with here. And then we have the whole realm of ghosts and elementals and spirits and demonics and all these different hierarchies of fallen angels. And of course, we've all heard Lucifer, Satan, Belial, and Leviathan. Of course, most of the Western religions just say the devil. Well, it's a little more complex than that.
So let me ask you about the real quick about the down that fourth hierarchy.
Yeah,
we have these delineations of what would be called a reference to the fallen angels, the demons, and so forth.
Exactly what they are.
Do those same characters and personalities and characteristics, or do they exist in the other three that are above, or are all the bad dudes down there at the bottom?
The bad dudes are at the bottom. They are cast down out of the upper dimensions. That's the theory. I personally believe that is true. And that is why they are evil, is because they hate us. They hate us because they were cast down because of us, because of the temptation. See, the Garden of Eden story is this metaphor where, the snake gave Eve the apple, and then Eve tempted Adam with it. These stories are much probably deeper than just that. And I think the evil spirits themselves, many of them were cast down by God, and the theory is that they are cast down in the earth. So this is specific.
Well, if they were cast down, they had to exist in that state at another level in order to be cast down, right?
Exactly right. Well, you remember, these were high angels that were believed to be up by Metatron. And see, what's interesting is in each one of these worlds, you can see the tree is replicated. See, right, and then when we start getting into the other principles of the trees that we were talking about earlier, these trees are replicated with these angels. You see, you have Metatron, you have Ratziel. See, and this is the interesting thing, where astrology came from, at least on Earth, when it was believed that humans were cast down, Adam and Eve were in the earth. They now had physical bodies. They were now clothed in physical bodies. They weren't before, not like this, not in the meat and bone flesh. That's the theory anyhow. And so Adam was actually trying to commit suicide, and God sent him the archangel Ratziel from the Sephira of Chokmah. And Chokmah is very fascinating because Chokmah resides above the celestial court of angels that surround the earth. And this is really fascinating stuff. That diagram that I had showed earlier, which was, I think it was this one, where we literally have the 72 angels that are called in the Bible Exodus. And these are 72 angels that rule each quintessence of the zodiac. And the zodiac is believed to be different than the constellations. You got to remember, the constellations are these nice little neat things. Or actually, the constellations are fixed, are they're star groups, right?
Right.
But they're not nice little 30-degree divisions.
And flattened. They are perspective. Right. They are not the scale variants that you do not see, right?
It's exactly.
It's like the tetratus, back in the Pythagoreans, where all it does is just you have a dot, and then you have another dot, and you have a line between.
They were drawing figures and animals out of these,
right.
And in fact, some of them I still have to look up there and go, "How in the heck did you come to that conclusion?"
Most of them, for me, yeah,
most of them, exactly. So that's why astronomers today, in the age of reason and science, laugh at astrology. Well, the interesting thing is, getting back to quote unquote astrology, the Bible is kind of the interconnecting piece here, at least in the Judeo-Christian religion, that really makes sense, because now we're dealing with a zodiacal belt that doesn't surround the solar system, it surrounds the Earth.
Mm-hmm.
Now that's what's totally different. And science can raise an eyebrow all they want at that, but it's in the Bible. I didn't write the Bible. It says God did, okay? Yep. So I'm just here to tell you that there are 72 angels that are extracted by permutations known as ciphers in the Bible, and these are the names. Again, I didn't make this up. I'm not the origin. I'm just the mailman saying this is the facts that you can extract, and many mystics and many rabbis and many Western, people will agree with me on this. This is the names of these angels. Mm-hmm. And here's the Hebrew right here. See, that's the Hebrew name. There's the English transliteration. So this is a zodiac that surrounds the Earth. So when you jump back to this other presentation, you say, well, wait a minute. The constellations aren't these nice little 30-degree divisions. No, they're not, because constellations are different than zodiacal signs. Mm-hmm. Zodiacal zodiac signs are nice, neat little 30-degree divisions. But here's even more of a mystery. When you start looking at the other issue of, okay, well, wait a minute. We have this tropical zodiac surrounding the Earth, okay? And even this diagram isn't really proper, because you'd have to draw that here. But you have that based on what we call the spring and fall equinox, the equinoctial points, and then you have what we call solstical points, if you want to say that. So the winter solstice and, of course, the summer solstice, where the sun is both highest and lowest in the sky. And that's due to the angularity of the Earth passing around the sun, hence why it's called a tropical zodiac. The sidereal zodiac is the path of the sun around this central sun, which is about 25,800 something years. Some will argue and say, no, it's 25,725,200, so many milliseconds.
That's very interesting, because it ties in with the precessional cycle.
Well, it is the precessional cycle. It is the precessional cycle. So we have the precession of the equinoxes.
So there's two cycles that are independent, yet independent of each other, because you've got, what you're saying is, it takes around 26,000 years to orbit our central sun,
or the solar system, right?
And then there's the same timing with the precession that is just relevant geocentrically, because the precession is
yearly
something of the Earth.
Yearly cycle. That's right.
The precessional is unique to the Earth. The sidereal cycle is unique to the orbit of Alcyon.
Yeah. Well, what precession is every year, like a clock, and it's not close to being accurate, it's exceedingly accurate. Every year, the sun will ingress into the first sign of the zodiac in a tropical system on the spring equinox, like a clock, every single year. Mm-hmm. And then it will move to the summer solstice, where it's highest. It'll move to the fall equinox, where it now is even. Equinox is a Latinized term that means equal. equinox, equinoctial point. So it's equal. The days and the nights are equal. And then you've got the longest day of the year, the winter solstice, and then it starts to move back up again. So, and, there's the metaphor of the cross as well, too, So it dies on the cross at the winter solstice and then starts to rise again.
Right.
So, but here's where the precession comes in. Every single year, the precession changes in the fixed stars because we are moving at a rate of 1 degree in this outer zodiac every 72 years.
Right.
Now, isn't that interesting? You jump back to the Shem Hemiphorus, 72 equals what? 9. And you also can go to the 72 angels, of course, equals 9. But here's another one that'll tweak your noodle. This one right here, you've got the Earth and the sun. The Earth and the moon relationship. Well, every 27 days, it's actually about 27 and a half days, but pretty close to 27 days, the moon goes around the Earth. Well, what's 7 and 2 is 9. Right? And then you got 4 divisions of this zodiac. I always joke around with the astronomers. I don't care how much they shine up the lenses on the telescope. They're not going to see this zodiac either. This is the lunar mansion used in Vedic astrology called the 27 lunar nakshatras. There's 4 divisions of each. Well, what's 4 times 27? 108. We reduce 108 to one number, 9.
9.
Yeah, and then not to really make your eyeballs cross. But if you come back to here, it is believed that the seraphims chant the permutations of God's name 10,800 times per hour. Okay? Now, reduce that to one number, 9. So creation numerologically is astounding. You've got this above all the universes, above God only knows what's in these dimensions, far beyond what our little noodles are ever going to figure out, at least not in this state of consciousness, I'll say that. And if our souls are created here, and I believe personally that's true, can I prove that to you? No, but that's my belief. I do believe that that's true. I think we come from a very divine place, and we may be fragments of God, and I think the biblical story is rooted in truth, and that is that we are fragments. They say there's 600,000 fragments minimum of each soul spark. It's pretty bizarre. I mean, when the theory is that the primordial man, which was Adam, at least in this time epoch, was shattered. The whole principles of Adam and Eve were shattered, and we are sparks that come from each part of that. Some come from the hair, from the eyes, from the eyebrow, the ears, the chin, the nose, the leg, the arm, the chest, all these different fragments of that human. There's literally potentially billions and billions of sparks, and no one knows for sure. And then,
there's a I think it's in the Jain tradition. There's a model where they say that there's a pulse that it's in the trillions of measurement that is essentially I think it's like 21 trillion times a second, if you will, for a reference and a measure of time, that this energy pulse is within the cosmos. So it's essentially binary. So when it's on, everything exists. When it's off, everything ceases to exist. So that there's a constant pulsing of.
I've heard that, and I would bet my personal intuition on that is it's probably the divine seraphims and the cherubims and the thrones.
And that's what made me think of it when you were describing that. I was thinking, well, I mean, and again, trying to conceptualize it with our extremely limited sensory capabilities and mental imagination and everything else is extremely difficult. However, if you think about it from just, again, make it simple, ones and zeros, just a binary. It's on, it's off, it's on, it's off, it's on, it's off.
Oh, yeah. And the amount of times you're talking about, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean,
I mean,
so
beyond
this,
comprehension. Beyond
and and one of the things that's extremely fascinating to me is I've looked at, these different ways in which the cosmos and consciousness and the materium is they try to put anybody tries to put a definition around it. There are some very fundamental characteristics throughout all of the mythos and the various disciplines and metrics that people have come up with to try to define this stuff. And some of those characteristics are there seems to be cycles which you can which all have their own definitions, but they are cyclical in the sense that they start, they go around, and they come around, and they keep going through an iterative process that can be looked at or considered from a cyclical perspective. And within those cycles, there seems to be two fundamental things: creation, and I don't know if you want to necessarily call it destruction. Maybe it's more of a metamorphosis or a transmutation of something. But there seems to be a starting point and then a transition point where it goes from one state to another. And typically, one of the typical things is there seems to be a destruction or an ending from the beginning, and then it cycles again. So there's like a consumptive aspect of the. You know what I'm saying?
No, I do. Yeah. And I mean, this is, again, what could do this other than an angelic force that is exceeding, all your physicists, your quantum physicists, the people talking about entanglement. I had the blessing once to speak at IONS, which was Edgar Mitchell's organization. He passed away a while back. And in fact, that's where this presentation comes from. I was at an IONS talk in Tucson, Arizona. And what was a great discussion that we got into was physicists will tell you everything's made of atoms and molecules and neutrinos, and that there's this huge amount of empty space in between everything, right? Mm-hmm. But if you drop back and say, okay, just what is the worlds, at least that we understand? It's all energy. It's protons, neutrons, and electrons. Well, isn't that interesting? You have positive, negative,
and now photons, right? You get the photons.
Exactly. And neutrinos, all these things that are building blocks. But the only difference between an atom of iron, an atom of silver, an atom of gold, an atom of, whatever, element you want to take, is the arrangement of these balancing forces. And they're all balanced in some way.
We've got about a minute left for this segment. So let's wrap this piece up, and so we can get into the second segment.
Real quickly, there are prayers that can be made to God, if you will, which I would certainly suggest that that's what we're doing, that can transcend the karmas and the astrology. Because if it didn't, we'd be screwed.
So
we might as well just be AI units, and we're not.
Well, and that's going to be a great place to pick up in the second segment. We've got about 30 seconds here. So, folks, what we're talking about here is a bridge between the materium, the physics, and the metaphysics of this thing called astrology and astronomy. And when we come back after this break, we are going to get deeper into this whole aspect of what is all this stuff and why does it matter? Because it does play a part in the roles and in the lives that we all experience. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back to the Nexus in segment 2 with my colleague, friend, and navigational system known as Jeff Harman.
I've never been called that before. That's good. I like that. That's
Well,
good.
now,
Been called a lot worse, I'll tell you that.
you and me both, my friend. But in
But
the first segment, we talked about we started off this whole series, and we're trying to give everybody a sense and a taste of what they can expect as we dive into the various aspects of this. Essentially, it's astronomy to astrology, and it's the cosmological constructs of creation. What astrology is, what astrology isn't, how it can be used, the mythos behind it, the ways in which it's been utilized and analyzed and prophesied about throughout all of history that we currently know. So there's a physical side, which we talked about in the first segment, regarding the actual astronomy, the materium, the way that it manifests, how these nonlinear forms in the sky are connected through what we see as stars, or the way that they've been constructed from a geocentric perspective. And then we started talking about the metaphysical side, which is what we're going to get into now in the second segment.
Sure.
So Jeff, let's talk about some of the things, like, for example, some of the luminaries and the people that have been that we've got some type of historical record about, and the way that they looked at and thought about astrology, and how they presented it and its import to not only their time, but to the human race and the human conscious experience in general.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up because, just a real recap of history, and this is only from my limited viewpoint because there's many people who have experienced and delved into the historical roots of astrology, and there's a lot of different viewpoints. But my exposure, David Pingree and many others. David's now long gone, but he was a fairly well-known researcher back in the 60s and 70s, and going way back further than that. Of course, you have so many wonderful researchers, but I would say that really the roots in the West can be traced back, hard sciences, to about 300 BC or earlier. The Chaldeans, the Egyptians, there's documents that were so well constructed in like around 300 BC. And then, of course, we know that there was stuff before that. We just can't find any hard manuscripts. And there's a lot of lore right now that the Greeks gave, the Indians the astrology, and then I find I personally don't believe that. There's overwhelming evidence that I think it went the other way around. In fact, there may be the case that the Greeks were some of the disassociated Brahmin castes that had come out of ancient India. And I think that's much more probable, and there's several people who have now been corroborating that.
So let me just clarify what you're talking about there. That you're saying that the Greeks potentially, and this sounds to me like it kind of ties into some of the readings by Casey regarding ancient souls that have had willful iterations of reincarnation, if you will, or iterations where they were souls and spirits and incarnates that had certain knowledge and experience, and they've come back around in their own cyclical iterations. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, and a lot of people say, where did astrology come from? Did it come from observation and deductive reasoning, or did it come from somewhere else? Well, India and Egypt, as well as some of the rabbinical texts, I think give us some really good insights into that. And one of them in particular is you take what the Brahmins and the ancient Jamini, Nadi, and Jyotish astrologers did in India, and they were actually called rishis or seers. That's what rishi means. It's the seer.
Mm-hmm.
And they would have converse with angelics that would tell them about this. Now, many people postulate, oh, that could be extraterrestrials. Well, maybe it was, but I also think it was angels too. And I think there may have been both. Who knows? I can't speak directly. No one can definitively say. But there is absolutely no way, in my opinion, that not only did, we're handed by modern Western history books that, what was it, Magellan and, of course, Columbus sailed across the ocean blue in 1492 to see if the earth was flat. And yet we have documents in India, Egypt, Chaldea, and Greece. Not only did they know the earth wasn't flat, they knew the solar system was going around a central sun. The central sun had a 250 million year galactic cycle around another, literally galaxy. And then there was a 200 and I forget, it was the yugas, it's some astronomical number that galaxy went around another galaxy. You don't get that by sailing across oceans to see if the earth is flat or sitting
looking for the edge, right?
Yeah, looking for the edge, or sitting on some camel on a mountaintop, observing stars. I mean,
right.
You look at ancient astronomy, and I should also point out, the word astrology really didn't even come on the radar screen until somewhere around the Middle Ages. I mean, when you look at, here's a perfect example, Guido Bonatti, who's probably one of my more favorite astrologers in the West and what we call classical or traditional astrology. He was primarily tropical. He called it the Book of Astronomy. Now, here's a man who wrote 16 to 1,700 pages of astrology in the 11th century. Okay? Actually, it was the 12th century. It was in the 1100s. Now, that was before the printing press. You did not have Microsoft Word. You sat there with a quill pen, and you wrote this on papyrus. You didn't go to Staples and buy a ream of paper. You literally, it was a major undertaking to pen anything like that. And if we go back to Egypt and of course the disassociation of ancient Egypt and all the wars that had happened, and of course we've all heard about the stories of Alexandria Library and all that being burned. Well, if what really saved a lot of this very ancient Egyptian knowledge, Chaldean and Greek knowledge, was the Arabs. The Arabs actually had something called the House of Wisdom. And a lot of people, when we hear the word Arab, we think it, Muslim and all that. But there was many Jewish astrologers. One of the more famous one was Mashallah. Mashallah lived in Baghdad. In fact, he was actually involved in the electional astrological chart of the formation of the city of Baghdad. Isn't that interesting? They actually picked the time Baghdad was formed. And Mashallah, prior to that, he and several other astrologers were skeptics. And don't quote me on the accuracy because I don't have this all in front of me, but I have all this documents behind me. Fascinating stuff. And they knew that if they didn't save this knowledge, it would be lost because of all the wars, the so-called holy wars.
Well, and this isn't this where a lot of these mystery schools and different societies that have they took responsibility for, not only
down the information.
They wrote it down, they protected it in a sense of knowing that it was the import of it, because of the metaphysical aspects of what it really represented. And through, again, whether, and to your point earlier, whether, some of this was, the majority of it came from an observational analysis over a great period of time and putting and then some of it, even if it was all given to us, there still logically had to be an observational analysis over a great period of time.
I think there's that too.
Yeah, that was constructed by someone somewhere, our space brothers, cousins, hybrids, relatives, whatever they might be.
All the monoliths that we see.
Somebody had to do it, right?
You bet. Well, going back again, we had started to talk earlier on the tree of life. there is a Sephiroth. These circles here, for anyone watching, these are what we call containment vessels of God's energy that are formed where the light is actually solidified or condensed in different vibrational frequencies, if you want to call it, or vibrational energies. Well,
and just real quick, just for everybody listening, for those of you that are listening on the radio and you're not seeing or on the streaming and you're not seeing the actual visuals here, this is a stunning conglomeration of an amazing amount of information and energy. So if you're just listening, I encourage you to go to the YouTube channel and see this, because this is some profound visual reference to all of the different things that we're talking about from both a physical and a metaphysical aspect of the cosmological construct of creation. A lot of the different stories and mythos and different disciplines of knowledge, whether it's, again, from a metaphysical or physical perspective or a scientific perspective or an ethereal perspective, the information that's on this chart that Jeff is showing right now is extremely profound, and it has an amazing amount of interdisciplinary components that you don't normally see put together in a relationship. So just again, for those of you who aren't looking at it on YouTube or on the other social media platforms that are showing the video, I encourage you to go look. The links are below, and you'll be able to go. So I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, no, it's okay. I mentioned earlier the celestial court, which is what astrologers look at, whether they're sidereal astrologers or tropical astrologers. But in the angelic hierarchy of souls, it is believed that there is this place of wisdom of angels that are in what we call a Sephiroth. A Sephiroth, again, is a word that means a containment vessel of God, or a dimension, if you will. And you can see here, for anyone who can see, and for those who can't see, it's actually called Hokmah. Hokmah is translatable into English as wisdom. It's God's wisdom. And interestingly enough, the final planet that I call the escape from Alcatraz planet is Saturn. And of course, we know Saturn has all these rings. I know Neptune and Uranus and Pluto, or at least Neptune and Uranus certainly do, have rings too. But Binya is meaning Saturn. Well, Ratziel is important because it is the angel, the archangel Ratziel, is the angel presiding within Hokmah. And it also seems to be a place that decides the karmic destiny of when you're incarnated. So a lot of astrologers like to say, oh, you're Pisces and Cancers and Aries and all this stuff. No, you're not. You're a soul having a physical experience. And whether you look at Vedic astrology, sidereal astrology, Chinese astrology, whatever kind of astrology you want to look at, it is the time these angels picked to stuff you in this meat suit called a body. Which is a very divine thing. I don't mean to demean it by calling it a meat suit, but it's certainly
I was actually appreciating the fact that you're being stuffed into a meat suit.
You're being attached to it, that's for sure. And going back to this diagram, this is really worthy of talking about. They say there's a guardian angel from the thrones that guides all us souls down into creations. And I do include the possibility that there is many dimensions, places, and planets that souls may incarnate. But it's interesting, Earth seems to be one, and I think the Bible's accurate on this, where souls come to purify and rectify the soul. Well, there's another guardian angel that they say attaches the soul to the embryo at conception, not at birth. This is why the Egyptians had preconception charts. We also see this in the Vedantic stuff. They're called, we could say, natal charts or prenatal charts. So
now, and just something just came to mind, and I'm just going to toss it out there because that nugget rolled in and it bounced into another nugget.
Yeah.
Could you draw an analogy to what you just said to this modern designer DNA baby selection characteristic kind of metaphor? In other words, what you were just describing was, if there's a court some group that decides the iterative reincarnation or has some influence at a minimum. Maybe it decides, but
very complex.
But you see what I'm saying? The analogy of, well, if they can do it at this ethereal realm, in this metaphysical space with these different energetic aspects of these levels, isn't that kind of akin to what we're talking about now with, designer DNA, being able to specifically craft or influence the way in which the materium in your meat suit is being. So in other words, you've got a meat suit that's been crafted with a soul and a spirit that's being crafted.
I mean, there's some analogies there, but I always like to say,
it's kind of out there, but
no, it's okay. And that reminds me of a good joke. I got to tell a joke. A couple of scientists said, we can create life. We have all the DNA, we have all the stuff that we need to, we can now create life. Mm-hmm. And they said to God, all we need is some clay. And God said, get your own damn clay. So, I mean, when I hear this stuff about DNA, to me, that's building blocks that are divinely in existence. We wouldn't have DNA if the forces in this universe, and I think very divine ones, didn't create it to begin with. It's like a person goes in the ground, digs out some iron ore, refines it, smelts it, and then forms it into a metal bar. Well, that's all great, and hail human technology and science for being able to do the miraculous things we're doing, but we're still doing it from the raw, universal, divine sources that were put here. It's like water. We can walk over to the sink and turn on the water and say, look, I just got a glass of water, and aren't we smart? We piped it into the house, but we didn't have water to begin with. It wouldn't be happening. You see what
right, and it reminds me of Terence McKenna's the way he expressed, how science works. Science says, give us one free miracle and we'll explain the rest.
Yeah, we'll explain the rest. Well, and C.S. Lewis had another great statement too. He said, science will say, well, water boils at exactly 212 degrees. Isn't that special? I just wanted a cup of tea.
Yeah, the old thing about you ask a watchmaker for a watch, and he explains how the watch works before you even think about getting a watch.
Yeah, you just want to know what time it was, right?
So back to this chart. Now, the one that you had up a minute ago, where it shows the human spirit, the human soul, the animal, and then the vegetable delineation.
Okay.
Yep. Now, this one here, now, again, for those of you that aren't seeing this, you've got to go to the YouTube channel and see this, because this is one of the most holistic approaches that I've seen that explains some of the theories that are out there that have been floating around for millennia in a lot of cases. But it's very interesting, because one of the questions I think people run into when they're exploring, different spiritual and metaphysical constructs of the way that the reality we inhabit, it functions. Because one of the common things is people say, well, if you believe in reincarnation, do people come back as other entities, not necessarily humans? Do they come back as other animals, animal spirits, insects, do they come back as trees and so forth? So there's a lot
on that. Well, it sounds to me like, everything, and no one, I find that I think humans may get punished in those lower dimensions, but their souls are much higher. In other words, they may get attached to that. In the Shari Hagilgum, which is a text that was penned by Rabbi Luria, also known by many as the Ari. See, we're pretty much in the Kabbalistic veins here to explain this, and I think the Kabbalah really works well, the ancient Kabbalah at least, to explain this stuff, because it's probably one of the most intact complex design models that we could use on God and creation and the angels. The Vedantic stuff too has it, but it's different. It's different. We have to use a lot of different terms. So I think for English-speaking people, this works really well. But you'll find that the Vedantic stuff is very analogous to this. So is the Egyptian. But back to what you were just saying, this tree is, all these diagrams are diagrams that I've been putting together for the last 25, 30 years. And essentially, I built this one out of a number of different diagrams, and it's I could put more on here, but it's really interesting because it fits Earth, at least how Earth is, and you can see each one of these rules a planet. Like Hokmah is what they call the solar system kind of guidance, and I think that's really accurate. Now, a lot of people, modern Kabbalists, will call that Uranus, and modern Kabbalists will call this Sephiroth Neptune, and this one Pluto. There may be some truth to that, but I really think from Saturn in is the ancient theology that worked with Vedic and also traditional astrology. And you'll notice something here really cool. If I zoom in, look at Saturn, you have musical notes. You also have colors, like it rules myrrh. You see, and notice frankincense is the upper Sephiroth here. In fact, here, you and I were talking about this earlier. This is really cool. The Sephiroth of Mars, which also rules the planet Mars. If you ever notice, what is Mars associated with? Warriors, gangsters, soldiers, intense people, police. But also notice tobacco. And don't we notice that pine is very cleansing, pine sol, the product pine sol? See, red is also associated with emergencies, but also tobacco. What's the quintessential image of a general? Puffing on a cigar. Think of General Patton or General Eisenhower. All smoke cigars, right? Let's have a cigar and talk about this. Or your gangster types. They all smoke cigars, right? Now, look at here. Here's Mercury. The rosemary rules Mercury, but it's also the Sephiroth of the intellectual things. And then you've got women with the moon, right? Or the feminine aspect. Notice lavender calms the psyche, calms the emotion. See, patchouli for Venus. And of course, the sun rules rose. And you can also see the archangels here. You got Camiel, Archangel Michael for Mercury. You got Haniel for Venus, Archangel Gabriel for the moon, Raphael for the sun. See? So getting back to the stuff we said earlier, astrology, which got us on this whole topic, astrology came, it's believed, from the Archangel Ratziel, that God sent the Archangel Ratziel, and there's actually a book called the Sefer Ratziel. Sefer means book, Ratziel means wisdom. So it was the book about all the angels that ruled the firmament and ruled the firmament around the earth. Fascinating stuff. And again, we got on this whole topic talking about some of the more modern people, and of course, George Washington and Benjamin Franklin may not sound modern, but when you go back and look from Egypt and India forward thousands of years, potentially, these guys were pretty modern. And Benjamin Franklin, of course, everyone knows who he is, right? He was one of the people present and signing at the Declaration of Independence. And he made very detailed, copious statements about astrology. He said, this is one of his quotes, "Astrology is one of the most ancient sciences held in high esteem of old by the wise and the great. Formerly, no prince would make war or peace, nor would any general fight a battle. In short, no important affair was undertaken without first consulting an astrologer." So isn't this interesting? And most astrologers were really called astronomers prior to the 17th century. In fact, I started to mention Guido Bonatti earlier. He wrote the Book of Astronomy. They were never called astrologers. In fact, Galileo, Newton, many of these people were astronomers that practiced astrology.
Well, so what you're saying is that the term astrology is a relatively new definition. From the standpoint of the metaphysics of astronomy. Yeah. Because you can't have astrology without astronomy. You've got to have the points. You've got to have the tetratus, if you will, of the way in which these, and you and I were talking about this earlier, I still look at some of these constellations and I think, how in the hell did you get that uh, a crab out of that, or Orion's belt even.
Right.
I mean, you look at that whole form that makes Orion, and you go, well, that's a kind of a stretch. I can see the belt part. That's pretty cool. I can see one arm coming up.
They
But
don't match.
the majority of these, as we were talking earlier as well, they look linear to us because the depth perception of where the actual stars are within the cosmos that form these constructs that we call zodiac signs are they're dimensional, and their scale and variance have nothing to do with the linear connections that have been made to give those forms that we have then that have been given some characteristics, right?
Do not line up. There is a difference between the fixed star constellations and the zodiac, and here's proof of that. All of your ancient astrologers, in fact, one of my most favorite astrologers to quote, and most Western astrologers will have heard of him, and if they haven't, they certainly should hear of him, and this is William Lilly. William Lilly is the end of the line, is what I would call him. He was the last one. He didn't follow the tradition exactly, but he was an astrologer in England, an English-speaking astrologer. So he wrote a book called Christian Astrology. And I think he called it that, so he didn't get the church to butcher him. But the point is that William Lilly was actually advising Parliament during the transition between King Charles I and, of course, the Parliament takeover of London, which has been in place ever since. Even though they have kings and queens and princes and all that stuff, they don't rule it. Parliament does. So what's interesting is he actually told King Charles, using interrogation astrology, which we'll talk about later in the series, interrogation astrology proves that the celestial court that we now today call astrology is actually an interactive consciousness with us. And why do I say that? Because you don't need your birth time. You don't need any time. You just cast an astrological chart for when you want to know a particular instance. This could be health. This could be missing items. Will I win the war? Will I win the lawsuit? Is my spouse playing around on me? Or is it our best interest to do whatever? So he actually predicted King Charles failing against the Parliament, and we know history, he got beheaded. He warned him of that.
So what you're saying, if I'm interpreting this correctly, is that because of the interactive nature of the energy of the consciousness of the cosmos, which is what we're talking about here, the construct of creation, is a conscious intent and will at any given time interacting with the energy that is the cosmos.
Your thoughts.
Right.
Yeah, it's an interactive consciousness, and people find that hard to believe. I find it still hard to believe that it's amazing.
that in and of itself,
I've ever been wrong is if I read it wrong.
Yeah,
and there are some tricky charts, let me tell you.
And that in and of itself is an awesome place to end the second segment here, as we are down to the last few seconds. If you're finding this to be interesting and informative, you will find a lot more on the website, bauer.media for the Nexus, and you will also find that on the YouTube channel, both on my channel as well as Jeff's, and links will be below. But this is the beginning. This is the start of an exploration into a set of knowledge and information that is way more vast than any of us have even thought about it, and is connected intersectionality between different thought disciplines that are extremely profound, very powerful. And we're going to be diving deep, deep, deep into these various areas that we've just scratched the surface on. So, Jeff, thank you as always. It's an amazing. It's always amazing to sit and it's too bad that we have this short construct on the radio side of it, but we will be commercial free and deep on the website. Again, that's bauer.media /the Nexus, and Jeff Harman on YouTube. And again, the links will be at the bottom. But my brother, thank you very much. This is we are scratching the surface, and I'm starting to see some smoke coming out.
You bet. And if anybody ever wants to get a hold of me, I'm Jeff at jeffharman.com.
Right. Jeffharman.com is the website, and the email is Jeff at jeffharman. And again, thank you very much for participating. I hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. And we are just beginning, so stay tuned.
All right. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you for joining us on this NexCast, the Cosmological Constructs of Creation. You can find more information at our website, bauer.media/The Nexus, where our forum continues the exploration with open, non-censored discussion. The Nexus NexCast is heard weekly on Tuesdays and Fridays at 11 p.m. Eastern on the Odyssey Radio Network at odyssey1.com. That's ODYSY1.com, where great shows that are daring to wonder of that which is and only beginning to be revealed, acknowledged, and understood can be found. You can also find real and raw talk that will challenge your mind at Streaming Talk Radio, with a lineup of new and fresh thought talent not found anywhere else. Until next time, my fellow travelers, explorers, and seekers, remember that we are all one in many and many in one.